Please welcome Atlantic staff writer Sophie Gilbert.
Hello, I'm about to introduce a best-selling author whose novels include Arcadia and Fates and Furies, the latter of which a little-known bookseller called Amazon named the best book of 2015. Her new book, Matrix, is a mesmerizing trip into the 12th century, where a teenage girl who's sequestered in an abbey because of her parentage finds extraordinary ways to realize her creativity and power. I am now joined by Lauren Groff. Lauren, thank you so much for being here at the Atlantic Festival.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to speak to my favorite profile writer. Thank you.
That's very nice of you. Lauren, you were working on another book when the idea for Matrix came to you. Can you tell us how it happened and why it seemed like a project that you wanted to, or needed rather, to pursue right away?
Yes, I was working on a book called The Bastard Wild, which I hope, knock on wood, will be out in 2023. And it's an inversion of captivity narratives, American captivity narratives, which I find amazing and weird and wonderful and very, very propagandistic. Right? So it's all about sort of justifying the way that Europeans came in and just colonized the U.S. And so I was working on this thing set in 1609 when I heard this lecture. At the moment, I was at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies at Harvard, which is this wonderful program where you're just you're put into a pod of other fellows, some of whom were astrophysicists, some of whom were filmmakers and sculptors and academics in different disciplines, so that ideas can spread. And it was magnificent. And so I heard this wonderful lecture by my friend, Dr. Katie Bugis, who's a historian and medievalist at Notre Dame, about the liturgies of nuns. And I had almost like a waking vision as I was sitting in the audience. I saw a way to talk about the current moment while looking at the past.
Can you explain why, in wanting to speak to the current political moment, you thought a historical novel would be the right way of doing that, or what potential it might have?
Yeah, part of it was the negative capability of my own ability to actually see what was going on. I was, as you know, being a person who's online as well, everything for the Trump years felt overwhelming. It was wave after wave of just disaster, it felt like. And I didn't have an anchor. I didn't feel as though I was able to grasp the whole or see the whole with any kind of clarity. But I desperately want to talk about things that are really dark and weighing on my heart, such as climate change, right? Such as the relationship of humanity to God and not mitigated, but sort of filtered through different religions, about the way that we deal with hierarchy, especially systematic hierarchies. So I saw this novel coming up, and I had this early love of the 12th century, in particular Marie de France, who's the first female poet that we know of in the French language. And Katie gave this talk, and these things came together, and I saw a way to make history and the current moment sing back and forth through time, through the air in some ways. I wanted to look back and see the roots of how we got to where we are, and I wanted the past to sort of look into the future. And it felt to me as though I had this moment, or these two moments, that were very clearly speaking to each other.
So I know that you researched the 12th century really intensively. And what were some moments that you had where you found something that was like an aha moment, or where you learned something that really surprised you, that felt like a connection?
This is a really hard question. The whole idea of writing about women in captivity in a certain way, right? Because the women at the time were kept in separate cages in certain ways. I think in the 12th, 13th century, in the medieval era, I think women only had two career paths. One was marriage and the production of children. That was the function of marriage at the time. And the other one, thank God there was this, was the church, right? And so at least there was a place for the misfits, for people who just had a horror of being married, for people who were disowned by their families or were too strange to be married off. At least they had a place to go to. So I think the whole concept of being in a specific moment, in a specific sort of cage, it spoke to, for me, the Trump years, where I think that every time I got into the car and turned on the radio and heard that just gross oleaginous voice, I just felt oppressed, or an oppressive weight on me. And lo and behold, those years are blooming in spectacularly hideous flower now.
Yeah. You've imagined utopian communities in your work before, but Matrix is unique in that it's a female separatist society. There are no men at all over the age of 12. And I wanted to ask you how that felt to imagine. Was it liberating, challenging, provocative, all three?
Yeah. I think also, so one of the other things that went into the book too was that the day before I heard Katie Bugus's talk, I was on a plane and I saw the film The Women, which is this 1939 George Cukor film. He famously did the Philadelphia Story. And it's amazing. It's such an amazing film. The screenwriter was Anita Luce, who did the novel Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which is one of my favorite comic novels of all times. It's so good. And the only characters are women. And they're funny. It's wisecracky. It's magnificent, except it's a product of its time. And even though the only characters on stage were women, they only talked about men, which drove me nuts. So I had this sort of, I guess, almost allergic reaction to this film that could have passed the Bechdel test, and it never did. And then the next day I heard this, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have a chance to do what so many texts of the past have done, which is relegate the female to the borders, to the edges. And there are male presences in this book. Jesus exists, right? But he's kind of a shadow along the wall, as opposed to taking any kind of center stage. There are no male characters that take center stage, and it was liberating. It felt magnificent. To only think about just the way that these women encountered one another, to concentrate conversation on the urgencies and the needs of the women around. No, this was I made a lot of jokes with all my friends that I wanted to found a lesbian separatist utopia on some Caribbean islands, and this is my only way that it could ever happen in my life.
It's so interesting, though, because the nature of power in Matrix is so fascinating to me, because Marie is a revolutionary and a dictator and altruistic and empathetic, and she saves her community, but the ways in which she wields power are not flawless. And I wanted to ask you what power means in the book, and what we can draw from that in terms of real life.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I started thinking about when I was thinking about power is that not one of us is pure of intention or heart, even if we can justify our actions. I think everything that we do is a little bit muddled. And so when I was thinking about the nature of Marie's power in the book, and the nature of the power of Eleanor Vauquotin, who's also a large character, generally off stage, but also a model in some ways, I wanted to look at both the way that power could be subverted, right? Both the hierarchy of the church at the time could be undermined through Marie's actions within this small abbey. It's a large abbey, but a confined space. But also the way that she's internalized the rules of power, as one does. You know, even I, who hate capitalism, have internalized the rules of capitalism, right? I am a participant actively on a daily basis in capitalism. And so it's a very tenuous place to be, to have this wobbly standpoint where you are actively working against something that you're also actively buying into. And with Marie, she couldn't not do it, right? So she had to, in some ways, enact male hierarchy, because otherwise she wasn't going to protect the nuns in the abbey. So it was both a tool and a weapon against her nuns' power.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it was clear to her what she was doing. She justified it to herself.
So, talking about power in a different sense, what are your intentions every day when you sit down to write, and what does writing mean to you?
Well, my intentions are to try to listen until I hear the living thing. And I know that sounds really abstract, but what I'm doing when I sit down, I'm very tired when I sit down to write. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm drinking coffee. Like, I wish I could be in a coffee cup. But I'm all I'm doing is sitting with the page and writing longhand and listening very, very hard and trying to pay very intense attention to some sort of truth that is there underneath the surface of the language, right? The language is really, really important, but not in the beginning of the writing process. So what I'm trying to do is steer urgently into an abstraction, which is very difficult to do because it's abstract, right? It's not concrete. And there's this amazing thing that I saw. The Greeks thought of words as fleeting gods, right? I love this. I love that. It's so beautiful. But if you think about the job of the writer is to sit there and try to summon these gods for a moment and then let their power be exerted on the text and then let them, dissipate again. So all I'm doing is just trying to summon both from without and from within. And often, most days, I fail at it. I try really hard and I can't hear the truth, or I can't hear the clarity.
But clearly you can, because you've written so many books and they're so good. I can't think of another word because I'm not a writer like you. I wanted to say, you read 300 books a year, which is superhuman. I know that people who want to understand the world better often turn to nonfiction, but I wanted to ask you to make the case for fiction, for what fiction can teach people, what it can show them, what reading fiction does to a human being.
I could also make the case for nonfiction. So
sure.
Just because
Whatever.
I'm making the case for fiction doesn't mean that I don't believe in nonfiction. I do believe in nonfiction. But I think that fiction is a more oblique way of getting at what it means to be human. I think that when one reaches for nonfiction, there's a very definitive goal in mind. How to understand the cosmos, for instance, or you read about how we got into this place where we are. Fiction has a way of undermining you, even as you're following it. And I think that is the purpose of art in any genre, fiction or nonfiction, is to take the foundations on which you've built your assumptions and just shake them and try to knock you off your feet, basically, right? That is what I remember, just standing in front of my first Rothko and thinking, going in, that, just a couple of blobs of paint, and then weeping because I felt this underlying foundation of who I was being shaken in a way that I couldn't understand. So I think that the obliquity, right, like the way that humanity is defined in negative space is something that fiction does extraordinarily well and is not drawn in positive space, right? So paying attention to the silences, the caesuras, the fermatas, all of the moments of silence that show us more clearly what it is to be human. That is the function of fiction to me, and that is one of the reasons why I'm never-ending reading. Not just fiction, but plays, but poetry, but nonfiction too, because I'm trying to delineate I'm trying to see, right? I'm trying to see clearly, and I can't if I don't have a great deal of landscape in front of me.
I love that. That was exactly the answer I hoped you would give. It was perfect. Thank you. Lauren, it's been so wonderful talking with you today. Thank you for making the time for this. Matrix is available now, but thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Sophie. I love talking to you always.
Okay.